3, 2, 1. Jane Ashcroft, you are the CEO of Anchor Hanover, which is the largest non-for-profit care and housing operator in the UK. Welcome to the Care Home Show.
Thank you very much, Simon. Good to be here.
Very welcome. Looking forward to doing the episode today. So, when we met to prepare for the episode, you told me the story around how you ended up being the CEO of Anchor Hanover. Can you tell me a little bit about the kind of the personal story and kind of how you ended up getting into the care sector?
Well, certainly not a plan. My plan, I loved being at school, so I thought I wanted to be a teacher. So I did that thing and trained to be a teacher, which was great, except I really didn't enjoy. Once I started my teacher training, I thought, I'm really not enjoying this. So I had to do something else. So when I finished at uni, I ended up as a graduate trainee in the electricity industry, which was really interesting. This was the late 80s. The electricity industry was about to be privatised, so it was quite fun. I did an HR qualification. But it was an organisation where everybody had been there 40 years. Everybody just stayed for their whole career. And I made a little deal with myself when I arrived that I wasn't going to stay more than 5 years. Towards the end of my really interesting 5 years, I saw a job with a housing association advertised. Didn't know what one of those was. Applied, got the job, had a great time with an organisation called Bromford in the Midlands, which was a general needs housing association. Again, a couple of years at Bromford and getting some good experience, but nothing ever really went wrong. So I was the HR director and life was really calm. Now, with hindsight, that was probably a good thing. However, I felt I needed to push myself a bit and I applied for a job with an organisation which was called, in the advert, TC Group, which was a merger of two care providers who, people who've been around a long time who might be watching this might remember Take Care and Cork Cavendish, and they had just merged and they were recruiting for a personnel director. They became Care First and I got the job. So I sort of landed in the care sector quite accidentally. Sure. But kind of just loved it immediately. So if you've got a background in people and HR, then the care sector is a great place to land because it's all about people. A couple of years with Care First, who became part of Bupa. So Bupa acquired Care First when I'd been there just under a year. And then I saw the HR director job advertised with Anchor. And I thought, how interesting. I've worked for a housing association and a care home group. Anchor does both of those things. I wonder how that works. And I arrived 20 years ago and I'm still trying to work out how that works, if I'm honest. So I've been with Anchor as was and now Anchor Hanover since our merger for just over 20 years. Came in as HR director, then ran various other things. My first kind of big general management role was running our home care service, which is when I went grey, because home care makes you grey. And then my predecessor retired about 10 years ago, and I applied for the chief exec job, kind of thinking, you've got to apply for this job, but you're not going to get it. And I got the job. So
lo and behold, here you are.
Here I am. So that's the potted history of, never have a plan, just take your opportunities, I think.
Well, I mean, it certainly sounds like the serendipity seems to have been on your side.
I have been very lucky. I think I've worked quite hard along the way, but I have also been incredibly lucky, and I've worked with great people and been given great opportunities. And I guess what I've done is just grab the opportunities when they've come along, really.
I think that's really important as well, isn't it? Kind of being in a position in life where you where you're open and you're kind of cognizant of what's going around you, so that you can see opportunities when they're presented. And
they don't always come at the right time and when you want them, so you kind of have to just go for it. And so, yeah. I
think that's definitely good advice. So, so tell me, obviously you're big on people, obviously from having come from a HR background. But why is what you do so important to you personally?
I think I just realised when I landed particularly in Care First and the care sector, the difference that it makes to people's lives, what we do. And I know that sounds cheesy, but in effect, when we get it right, the vast majority of the time, we change people's lives at a difficult point for many people for the better.
Sure.
When we get it wrong, it's really bad to get it wrong. So it's a very important thing that our organisations in this sector do. And I just think it's really, really compelling. And in the time I've been in the sector, so 25 years or whatever, what's interesting to me is how it's gone from being a real sort of backwater, saying you worked in aged care or worked with older people 25, 30 years ago, people wouldn't really know what you were talking about, has become a much more important issue because most families have got older people as part of their families now. It is an area where government policy and the economy is getting more interested. There's a lot of opportunity for growth. So I think at a at a very sort of individual level, it makes a big difference to people's lives. And perhaps there's something about, I did want to be a teacher originally. There's something similar to that around just that having an impact piece. That is the thing that probably means that it's a sector that grabbed me, and I've never felt I could walk away from it, really.
Got you. It's definitely one of those sectors where it seems to, whether you've got come from like a personal experience within a family or family member, or whether you've kind of, I guess, fallen into it as you did. Yeah. It seems to grip you. It seems.
And
to
I
be
think
one of those.
people do know quite quickly whether it's the sector for them, and so I'm sure we're not the only ones that we see quite a bit of churn of people who come in and perhaps don't stay very long. And I think if it's not the right sector for you, it's definitely not the right sector.
Sure.
So there's something about, if it is right, then people stay and make a career and make a fabulous impact. And for other people, it's just not the right place for them. And it's important that we recognise that.
I guess it comes down to kind of people's motivations and things like that. I guess if maybe they don't have the right motivations in the first place, but maybe that's where some of that churn comes from. Or
even with the right motivation, but just the skills that you need, the variety of skills, I think, to do sort of the frontline working with our residents and our customers in our different types of services. You have to have quite a variety of skills, and you have to be emotionally pretty resilient.
Definitely.
As well. I always remember I had a day out with some of our home care colleagues when I first got the gig running our home care service, and a couple of days out and about around meeting some older people who were living on their own, and most of them were incredibly lonely, and the only contact they had, many of them, was with our carers who came to see them a couple of times a day. And I found that quite emotionally draining by the end of the day, and I suppose partly you sort of think, is this my future? There's an element of that, whereas our fabulous carers didn't see it that way. They saw the difference they were making. So they kind of drew an energy from it rather than a negative from it.
Sure.
And I think that's perhaps the difference. There's something about if the right people in the sector can absolutely see the positive of what they do. And people get really tired, physically and emotionally tired working in this sector, I think. But at the end of the day, the impact that people see they're having on our individual residents and service users and customers, and whatever language we use, is what really motivates people.
Tell me about what makes Anchor Hanover special as an organisation.
Well, I'm completely biased, but I make no apology for the fact that I do think we are special. I think what I like, and it relates to my history in some ways, is the range of services that we offer and the variety of what we have. So there's lots of great organisations in the housing and care sectors, and I think it's in all of our interests for the whole sector to do well and to have good operators. I'm not naturally competitive. I'm a fairly collaborative sort of person, but let me tell you why mine's the best. I do think that the joy of Anchor Hanover is that we have 55,000 people living in our services, from people who are 55 to people who are 108. We've got several 108-year-olds that I'm aware of. I said that somewhere. I said, we've got 308-year-olds. And the person I was talking to said, you've got a 308-year-old? No. I'm aware of at least 3 customers who are 108. So we've got that amazing age range. So we've got several generations of people living with us. But also we've got people living completely independently in purpose-built retirement housing, having a fabulous quality of life and able to be independent, participate in a local community and have a great time. And we've got people living in different tenures, so people can rent properties from us, they can buy properties from us, they can have care available on site. And then we've also got our amazing care homes where we provide really high quality, well rated by CQC services to people living with dementia, living with a really significant degree of frailty in some cases, and still make a real difference to people's lives. So I think that range gives us loads of experience to tap into, and it means if we learn something over here, in one of our services or one of our service types about how to help people to get the best out of life, so sort of the lifestyle side or the food side of what we do, we can translate that learning across the whole organisation. And nice. I think that makes it, that for me is part of the Anchor Hanover sort of stardust, really.
Got you. Do you think because there's taking kind of learnings from different perspectives, and that's obviously something that you're big on, do you reckon there's an element of your kind of your previous career kind of shining through there from the perspective of teaching in there in any way at all?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's not about me, it's about the whole culture of the organisation, but there's definitely something about that kind of shared learning. And people with an appetite to learn I think are drawn to the organisation and to try different things, and hopefully we support that by investing heavily in training and development for people too. But I hadn't really thought about that before, but perhaps it is a little bit of that desire to teach and to learn a bit.
I've had quite a few people, when I've asked them questions about kind of what their kind of pearls of wisdom are from their kind of experience in the sector, and quite a few people have just said, just education, just engross yourself in into learning, become a kind of a lifelong student. Because the more that you know, the better you are going to be at your team's going to be at kind of serving whichever angle of the sector you're kind of trying to support, whether that be an operator of some description or a supplier. The more that you understand, the more capable that you're going to be be able to support things. And it's obviously paying off well, because you've got, Mark told me this the other day, Mark Greaves, your Director of Care Services, is it 13 outstanding homes?
I should know that. I'm off to lunch this Friday with our outstanding care home managers. So we get the outstanding managers, so everybody who's got a full outstanding rating for the whole service and outstandings within the individual 5 areas. We get everybody together, our Chef of the Year cooks us lunch, which is fabulous, and everybody shares good practice. And then we record that and we circulate it around the organisation. Because there's that constant shared learning, continuous improvement. So the numbers move around, but fundamentally the number of outstanding is clocking up all the time. And that's great, and I'm really proud of our outstanding services. The most important thing for me is that we haven't got any inadequate services.
Sure.
And I think, I might have talked to you about this before, I talk about kind of lifting the bottom. So it's great to be outstanding, but my priority is everything being good, and certainly not having inadequate services.
See, that's probably not too hard when you've got 10 care homes. It's probably not too hard. Maybe if you've got maybe even 20 care homes. Once you start kind of entering into the kind of the realms of being bigger than that, it all becomes very, very difficult, because you've obviously got, there's always going to be a range in there. Managing that must be quite a task.
Yeah, so we've got about 120 care homes. I know I should know that, but we've got some new homes, and there's always a bit of movement. And we've also got registered care services in our extra care scheme, so we've got domiciliary care registered as well.
Sure.
So we have got over 140 services registered with the Care Quality Commission. Scale. There's pros and cons of scale, I think. So Anchor Hanover operates across 1,700 sites in England. So a site will be a sheltered retirement housing service with a block of flats and a colleague on site, or a retirement village which might have 500 people living in it, or a care home. So lots of different services. And really the only way that you can make sure that your quality is good, well, there's a couple of things you can do. You can make sure that the people in the organisation are great, so it's always about culture, I think. You can make sure you've got good quality systems and processes and good monitoring, and quality assurance, so that there's a way of doing things. But fundamentally, it does come down, I think, to having an organisation that has a shared culture and a shared focus. And I always think of the organisation as a series of circles, really. So I would always draw the organisation. I think I sit in the middle of a big organisation, and then there's through to the front of the organisation where my colleagues are running homes, working in homes, team leaders in homes, running services. You can, as I say, there's pros and cons of scale, really. You can. The important thing for me is, so you talked about Mark, who's our MD of care. The size of our care home portfolio, Mark has 4 regions, and the regions have district managers and homes, and Mark can know all of those home managers, and we can get the home managers together on a regular basis, and have enough contact that people hopefully don't feel isolated out there, and feel that Anchor Hanover, and this is true on our housing as well as our care services, is a support mechanism that people can rely on to help them to do a great job.
It's interesting, I've heard of more groups recently kind of scrapping the name head office as such and renaming that to something that is, because even if they are of the mindset that they are a support function, they're there to effectively to serve the homes. If it's called head office, that sounds very autocratic and kind of...
Yeah, and I don't think we've ever really... So we've got a small office in London, which has got 15, 20 people in it. It's mainly training rooms and meeting rooms. So if you come and visit us there, you'll find health and safety training going on and safeguarding training going on and some induction and that kind of stuff. And I've got a desk there. I'm perhaps there 2 or 3 days a week. We've got a large base in Bradford. So all of our Anchor Hanover On Call, which is our 24-hour available, so people living in our rented housing, in all of our housing, can pull a cord and speak to a human being 24 hours a day. And Hanover On Calls in Bradford, all of our kind of accounts payable, our important finance teams, our IT teams, lots of people are based in Bradford, and then the rest of us are just on the road really. If you want to find somebody kind of from Anchor Hanover, motorway service stations, railway stations, when you get us together, we know where Marks and Spencer's, where's Waitrose, which ones have got Starbucks, which ones that is very valuable knowledge in our organisation.
That sounds like that sounds very familiar, I must say, as somebody that runs an organisation where our team are field based. That's you've got to know where the important amenities are, of course. So, Anchor Hanover is, of course, a non-for-profit organisation. I think some people aren't necessarily kind of clear around what that might mean. So, can you talk through what that means in general, if you like, and then more specifically around what that means for Anchor Hanover?
So it's quite an unusual thing. So we're not the public sector, we're not a local authority, and we're not the private sector in that we don't have shareholders. So we do occupy this sort of quasi-land in the middle. So in our case, we're a housing association, which is an independent organisation. So we have a board of non-executive directors who oversee scrutinise the performance of the organisation, just as the board of any organisation would. And we make a profit, and we talk about profits in the organisation, but we don't have any shareholders to give our profit to. So it gives us the ability to reinvest and to try new things, so things like our first retirement village at Denham in Buckinghamshire, which we built quite a long time ago now. That was one of the first in the sector. We could explore a bit of research and development because we have a slightly different dynamic, but we need to be sustainable. Our housing regulator, the regulator for social housing that regulates all housing associations, assesses our financial viability because it's really important for the tens of thousands of people living in our services that we are viable and we can afford to reinvest in their homes and the places where they live for the future. And the Care Quality Commission assesses our financial viability as well in relation to their market oversight role. So as a large provider, we provide financial information to CQC so that they can see that we're safe to carry on providing homes for residents. So I always say to people, I've worked in the private sector as well as in the not-for-profit sector in my career, and in the private sector, if you're very efficient and you do a good job, then you make a return for your shareholders, which is a perfectly valid model and is hundreds of years old. In our sector, if you're efficient and you do a good job and you make a return, then that's money we can put back into the business. That's a really nice model.
Sure, got you. And I guess has that been part of the fuel to help scale? Because Anchor individually and then Hanover individually were both. Hanover was a non-for-profit as well.
We were both housing associations. Yeah,
and they were both quite big organisations before the two were brought together. So ultimately, they've done a great job of doing that, being efficient and doing a good job, and then kind of scaling the organisation by reinvesting.
Yeah, the drive for the merger really. So Hanover, a large housing organisation focused on older people, so similar to Anchor without the direct care delivery activity. The benefit of putting the two organisations together was largely about efficiency. So the economies of scale that you can have. So some of that around procurement. So both organisations had big contracts around planned works and lift replacements and windows and kitchens and all that. When you're managing 50,000 properties, there's big bills around that stuff. You get a better deal as a bigger organisation. I make that sound really simple. My head of procurement would be laughing at how simple I've made that sound. So partly that, partly one organisation only needs one exec team and one board and one finance team and one 24-hour call centre and those kind of things. So we've managed that change carefully. So we have, as part of the merger, some roles have been made redundant. We've supported people through that process and people have moved into other roles and they're doing really well in those. And that gives us a stronger balance sheet. So those savings, we can borrow more money, use our resources to build more stuff. So we've got a healthy development programme of building housing, so planning to build about 3,500 units of housing over the next sort of couple of years for older people. I mean, that's a drop in the ocean. We've got 20,000 people on our housing waiting list.
Wow.
So we could build and build and build. And also this year you've seen we've grown our care home portfolio. So 5 homes from Hadrian came into the group earlier in the year, and we're looking to add further capacity to our care home portfolio too. So yeah, the strength of our balance sheet, our financial efficiency, the merger made a lot of sense on many levels.
That's really interesting. And what could? Okay, so you've talked about kind of the reasonably short-term kind of growth aspirations and things like that. What could the organisation look? I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years down the line?
Well, I haven't got a crystal ball to go that far. Although, interestingly, because of the nature of our organisation, so both Anchor and Hanover were over 50 years old, so we are kind of long-term. And I guess that's the other thing about being a not-for-profit is you can and you're expected to take a long-term view. So I very much see my role, I'm a steward of an organisation that will still be here in 20 or 30 years' time. Might have a different name by then, although I quite like Anchor Hanover. But fundamentally, one of the differences, I guess, is nobody can come and buy us. So I think if I look back, when we celebrated our 50th anniversary, we looked at some of the historical data around the people who set the organisation up in Anchor's case and what their priorities were. And in effect, we exist to meet the changing needs of the older population. So I would assume that the organisation, certainly our business plan, assumes that we'll grow not just by development of new properties and by acquiring more homes, but also potentially partnerships with other organisations and developing new services. So I think if I reel back 20 years ago when I arrived at Anchor, there were housing services and care services and not much in between. The area where we've had a lot of growth is that area where we provide housing and care in one site. So whether we call it extra care or independent living or assisted living, or there's lots of different language, but that quite interesting interface between an apartment that somebody can buy or rent in later life and then an on-site care facility, lifestyle services. Lots of focus on well-being. I would imagine if I scroll forward, certainly our plan for the next 4 to 5 years, we want to invest time, money, resource in well-being and positive ageing, whilst also recognising that we're all about helping people with living with dementia and frailty. And those two things aren't mutually exclusive. You can still have a good quality of life while dealing with some of the challenges that ageing might throw at you.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've got, I see more and more kind of different kind of iterations of care and kind of support, if you like, which is good because ultimately it provides care seekers with choice, which is obviously very, very, very important. I think hopefully the maybe not gone are the days yet, but like in the future there will be more kind of choice available to people. But come back to your point, I think there's at the moment we don't do as well as other countries for older people, kind of like lifestyle choice. If you look at kind of New Zealand and Australia and places like that, they've got the retirement living is the public perception of that is that's a great lifestyle choice, whereas I think in the UK at the moment it's probably a smaller group of people that think that that's a great idea, albeit the fact that obviously again it's got to be down to choice. Typically it is a great idea because there are some fantastic organisations like Anchor Hanover that do that really, really well. But there's still a certain amount of kind of almost social stigmatism around that, which is sad, really. There's
a number of things. I guess other markets have some things in their favour. So the housing markets in some other countries are quite different, and the expectation about ownership versus rental. Land is cheaper in some places. Land's always an issue in this country. The value of land and the accessibility of land through the planning system. It is interesting, and we look at other countries. So we're members of ARCO, which is representative body for the retirement village sector, which has got some great learning from other countries. And I think one of the things we need to do is learn from other countries to speed up our own development. But certainly a very small percentage of older people in the UK live in purpose-built retirement housing. And It's not that, I think everybody should. I think there should be choice, exactly as you say. And I would hope that those choices would become more positive choices.
Sure.
Rather than, I think one of the things we have to overcome is the stereotypical assumption of what older people's services are in the UK. Everybody assumes everything's a care home, and they may not know that care homes are great, vibrant places to support people and have some kind of outdated views about care homes. So changing that is something that I think we're all working quite hard on. Things like Care Home Open Day have started to eat into that. I'm always interested, there's lots of talk about integrating health and social care, and it's one of those things that's been a theme in my 25 years in the sector, and you see little bits of progress. In many ways, actually, integrating or close working between housing and social care is a more fruitful area. Everybody needs somewhere to live, and thinking about how your care needs can be met in an appropriate setting, rather than thinking about the pure health drivers and how can we speed up people's discharge from hospital. Very important though those things are, but it often just, and it might be, particularly we're a housing association and a social care provider, but we're used to kind of working between those boundaries, and that's often easier to navigate. So I think there is, as more of us live longer and people want to make choices in later life, there are more and more advocates for retirement living amongst our customer group, and that's the most powerful group of people. Sure. People living in our services saying, we want more of these, build more of these. Yeah. Much more powerful than any of us trying to campaign for it.
I mean, ultimately, it's exactly right. It's got to be market driven at the end of the day, isn't it? I think that some of that still comes from kind of the public perception of what's available, and also just you don't know what you don't know at the end of the day. So it's almost an education piece, like maybe whether that be through media or whether that be through government, helping people to understand. I know people that have benefited from care services to the extent that the expectation was that maybe they're not going to be on this earth for an awful lot longer, and it's actually given them a new lease of life, which is just tremendous.
And you certainly see people who move into retirement housing or a village or independent living and start with quite a high care package, and that care package reduces. And some of that is living somewhere that's easy to live makes a big difference. So not having to worry so much about your property and those kind of things, and living in a supportive environment. So just a community where people help each other out. And I think we need to really focus on that. And there's some very practical, the housing crisis in this country, the lack of affordable housing, the concerns about younger people being able to get on the housing ladder. Actually, investing in older people's housing really helps, and that's one of the things that I think the message hasn't quite landed enough yet, and we keep banging on about. This isn't about governments making choices between should we provide housing for younger people or should we provide housing for older people. It's about recognising that it's a ladder, and there's a lot of focus on helping people get on the ladder. If you're helping people at the other end of the ladder to move to somewhere that's appropriate so they'll have a better quality of life and they'll free up a family house, then it's a real win-win.
Yeah, definitely. Slight change of gear. As somebody that's come from a HR background, you're all about people, and I know that's obviously the workforce, if you like, is something that you're immensely passionate about, both at a sector level and both at that and an Anchor Hanover level as well. What from your perspective, how can we make care a career choice for people kind of entering into the kind of employment world, if you like?
Yeah, I mean that's really important because we've got such a demand for great people, and such the number of vacancies in the sector is a real concern. Needing to rely on agency use is never good. Not just the cost of agency, which in a low margin business isn't something you want to do, but it's also the impact on the quality of the relationships and all of those kind of things. So I think it relates to the thing we've just been talking about in terms of the impressions of the sector. So we need to overcome the outdated or stereotypical views about what older people's services are like. And I think there's some really good stuff going on. There's lots of intergenerational work happening. I know most of our services have links with local schools, whether it's reading clubs, gardening clubs, all kinds of just very practical relationships which benefit the young people in the school and our services. So hopefully some of those things will pay off at some point in the future. But I think also this is a sector that has so much demand for good people, and it's a sector where you don't need to have the highest academic qualifications. It's a skills-based, compassionate. We can bring people in with a wide variety of different skills and experiences, and they can have a really big impact and build a career. So there's lots of people in our organisation who joined us as frontline carers or volunteers who are now, I think of a district manager who's running 6 or 7 care homes, a significant budget, a significant number of residents, a significant workforce, who came and joined us in a voluntary role when she was a student. And it's fabulous for people to be able to build those careers and to do lots of different things. So I think we've got to find a way of moving from that out-of-date view about what it means to work in older people's care and housing and show that it is a sector where you really can build a career, build your skills. We can't dance around the pay issue. It is a sector where the frontline work is relatively low paid. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think the funding side of the equation has to be addressed, is so that we can deal with the workforce issues. This is not unskilled work, this is very skilled work. And, all of us, I'm sure, would want to be, if we need to live in a care home and we need somebody to help us in the later stages of our life, I want somebody like the people I see in my care homes who are skilled and compassionate and have up-to-date knowledge and, incredibly rounded people, and we need to reward those people for that level of skill. So I think technology can take away some of the sort of routine tasks, I hope, over a period of time, and free people up to do the real value-added stuff. But I think that's where we really need to work with governments, policymakers, local authorities to get the balance of investment in the sector. So we need great environments for people to live in, so we need to be able to invest in our properties, but predominantly we need lots of people with lots of skills who feel rewarded, and then people can build those careers in the sector.
I think that last word that you said, or one of the last words, sorry, that you said, I think is really, really important. The fact that it could and definitely should be seen as being a career path, whereas I don't think that's necessarily, again, it comes down to a public perception thing. I think, unfortunately, it all too often it's seen as a job, which is ultimately it's a shame, because when you've got the right person, then they can rise through the ranks in kind of the career ladder and things like that, and be fulfilled in a different way with bigger responsibilities, or different responsibilities, I should say, as they kind of develop through their career and things like that. It's important to help people know that that's a possibility. I'm really excited. I've got 3 guests coming up on probably within the next, let's say, probably in the first quarter of next year, all of whom either started as a carer or a nurse, and now they're in the CEO position, and it's just it's wonderful. I want to get that message out as possible, just to be able to say, look, this is possible. This is a thing. If we can do anything that we can to try and champion that mindset, I think.
And also we have to recognise. So, as a sector, social care is a very big employer.
Huge.
And often not seen as one sector because we're so fragmented. And I think we've got better at speaking as a sector, being seen as a sector. And, a bit of credit to the Department of Health and Social Care, that they've tried to do some work around recruitment and seeing the sector in a more cohesive way. I think that is a positive. Other sectors are in decline. So, retail is completely different in a very short period of time. And you can see that some other sectors are going to be impacted by technological change and economic change. That's an opportunity for us. We need to make sure that, we show this sector as a growth sector. There's loads of people looking to invest in the sector to develop new services. And so this is a sector that's good for our economy. And instead of being seen as a drain, needs to be seen as a positive for the economy and a positive for the employment market. And I think sort of people are starting to wake up to that. But I think there are some signs of hope. I mean, there's some tough stuff to work through at the moment if you're trying to run social care services, and particularly if you're in a commissioning environment where there's just not enough money. But I think there are some positive signs that consumers who are making their own choices choose services that work for them, and that enables us to have business models that are focused on what our consumers want, and then you can kind of put your colleagues, your workforce, you can wrap that around. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to really try and reflect that in the way we shape services for our customers and the way we shape our organisations as great places to work. So we have 4 objectives in our business plan, and one of those is about more opportunities for colleagues, because we know, I know when I get letters from people who use our services or their families, the thing they rave about when they're being complimentary about our services is the people. Buildings are really, really important,
of course,
but a building is a building is a building.
Yep.
Actually, it's the people that make the biggest difference. And, Anchor Hanover sort of doesn't exist. Anchor Hanover is 10,500 people out there working hard to help older people to have a great later life. So I think recognising that, we've just done, we have an annual colleague survey, and we assess our engagement and we benchmark our colleague engagement against not just people in the sector but more widely across other organisations, because I absolutely know that having and keeping the best possible colleagues will drive our resident satisfaction and ultimately drive our sustainability and our profitability. It's a proper hard measure for me. It's not that soft, fluffy stuff. I think people sometimes think, oh, yeah, she's from HR, she likes all the fluffy stuff. To me, it is absolutely the backbone of a business in this sector, is that you employ, retain, train, motivate a fabulous group of colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. I was having a chat with somebody the other day, and I was contemplating something that the other person basically said, and they were talking about kind of business transformation. And my first response to the fact that they were kind of aiming for this business transformation was the fact that before you undergo any type of business transformation, ultimately you've got to undergo a certain amount of cultural transformation. You need to make sure that you've got the right team. You've got to make sure they're on the same page and that they're all pulling in the same direction, because all of the aspirations and things that you're looking for, whatever that might be, it's the people that are going to deliver that at the end of the day. And whether that be a senior role, kind of making big leadership decisions, or whether that be somebody providing a meaningful interaction with somebody in one of the homes or one of the other services that you provide. It's got to be going to be delivered, and ultimately it's going to be delivered by a human being. Getting all those humans doing all the right stuff at the right times, very, very important.
And making sure that if you're trying to change something in your organisation, the people who know best what will work and what won't work are the people who do the jobs. So, that there is definitely a role for looking in other sectors and learning from other sectors, and, taking research and those kind of things. But you also need, I know we've got brilliant ideas across our organisation, listening to, I always think a big part of my job is listening to people, just sitting in the middle of the organisation, being out and about, listening to what matters to our residents, listening to what matters to their families, listening to what matters to my colleagues, so that when we sit in the middle and make decisions each year about the budget or what the business plan priorities are, or that actually that's shaped by the real experiences of people using and working in our services.
I guess it's picking up the contextual points and then kind of
working and what are the themes, what are the things that are local issues that exist in that place and need sorting or addressing there, but what are the themes that run across the whole organisation?
I'm very, very lucky. I've got a coach who's the chairman of a global coaching business, and he always talks about the difference between context and content. Context is obviously going to be those really key points, again, the trends and things like that, and then kind of content is everything else, and it's being able to be able to listen
where you are in that,
carefully and to pick up on the kind of the salient points that are ultimately going to make they're going to have the biggest difference on the future decision making and all that type of stuff. So from an employer perspective, what do you see as being the biggest challenges from the perspective of whether it be kind of care, housing, support services and things like that? What would you say the biggest challenges are?
I think this is not a well-known sector, and it's not a well-described sector. And so that constant getting people out there talking about their experiences to challenge that. Advertising doesn't work. It's the 21st century. We know when somebody's trying to sell us something, don't we? You watch an advert and somebody says, I'm a happy care worker and I look like I might work at Disney, and I'm not being dismissive of Disney, but real people telling their stories, I think, is really powerful, and trying to find ways of doing that in an honest way is important. So we've got to keep kind of trying to address that point and show the positives about working in the sector. We do need to address what are the rewards of working in this sector. I think there's been a lot of discussion generally around health and social care and sort of parity. So the discussions around parity of treatment, parity between physical health and mental well-being. There's similarly an issue about the parity of workforce between people who work in the health sector and people who work in social care. And, you know, I've been really, really pleased to see the Secretary of State wearing the green care badge, because it used to drive me mad that there was always an NHS badge and not a care badge. And in some ways that seems really, you know, minor, but it's actually quite significant, I think, to say this is a sector that has a degree of pride and does amazing things. So I think we've got to keep working away at that. I think engaging with people at an early stage, so working with schools and through careers processes. But we also need to recognise that most people now will all probably have 2 or 3 or 4 careers. We need to work longer, you know, the consequence of living longer. People, can't imagine many people, that idea of a lovely long retirement, actually, I think we're really rethinking our views as a society about, yes, perhaps working less, but still working, people wanting to work, needing to work. So not just catch the school leavers, but also at the point at which people are ready for a career change, how do we bring those skills into our sector as well? And I think one of the things we try to do is really understand what matters to people. So thinking whether that's about rewards, benefits, ways of working, really trying to understand that and build the way that we operate around that.
I guess it's connecting with the right people in the audits with the right message and things. Have you seen any of Neil Eastwood's recent research that he's launched? So I did an episode with him a couple of weeks ago, and he basically said that he did a study on, I think it was 300 different care facilities. They asked the manager of each of the care facilities, I think it was a mixture of care homes and dom care, and they basically said, so what was the origination source of your superstar? Pick one person, your superstar carer. If you could emulate that person and just kind of almost clone that person, what was where did they come from? And it was, I think, 36% of the people, which was the largest number, was people who had had a personal experience in care, whether that was somebody young or somebody further on in their kind of life's journey and things like that. That was the one thing. And I think the next section, I think, was because they'd felt compelled to it, which I think was about 10 or maybe 11%. So it's 3 times higher. So it's working out how do you then connect with that person, which I found really, really quite fascinating. What's your experience of that, thinking about it once?
I mean, there are a lot of people in our organisation who have had personal experience of the care system. And similarly in housing, a lot of the people in our housing service are passionate about providing a great place to live because they've seen or experienced the downsides of having an ineffective housing system and not having great places to live. So that undoubtedly does drive people. And I guess, you know, family shapes, sizes are changing, aren't they? So we did some work a couple of years ago about the 5-generation family, which is no longer that unusual, you know, to be able to have, and I often tell a tale about going to a 100th birthday party. This was in one of our housing services, and the lady who was turning 100 was a bit late for her birthday lunch because she'd been at a Keep Fit session in the morning. And we sat around having fish and chips for her birthday lunch, followed by a very nice birthday cake. And she was celebrating a big birthday. Her son was there, he was 80. So actually it was a 105th birthday party. Her son was 80. He'd actually been a scheme manager with Anchor and had them retired. He'd just lost his wife and he'd had a hip replacement, so he actually needed quite a lot of support. His daughter, who was kind of 50-ish, her daughter, who was in her sort of mid-20s, and her little one, who was 2. And 5 generations of us sitting around a table eating fish and chips. And I just thought, that you see all these graphs about living longer, and that's great. It's really good we're living longer. The reality is that means if you're the 50-year-old in the middle, you've got 2 generations above you, potentially. So in this example, the 50-year-old was quite worried about her dad, who needed quite a lot of support. She wasn't so worried about her grandma, who was still off at Keep Fit and living quite happily in our housing. And then she was also doing some childcare to help her daughter, who'd just gone back to work and had the little one. It's a completely different world to the world that the current systems, the pension system and the benefit systems, and were really built for. And then you add in sort of blended families and the fact that many people will have several relationships in their life. So And I think it's great. It's a completely different way of thinking. And actually, we need to reflect that when we think about our organisations as employers. So we need to be flexible organisations. We need to be, reflecting the fact that lots of people will have caring responsibilities. People will have an older relative. I think we've gone quite a long way on childcare in this country, which is a good thing. We haven't really scratched the surface of thinking about how people cope when they have an older relative who needs some care and support. And what does carers leave really mean, and how do you manage to maintain your career and make sure that the person that you care about is also okay, and all of those kind of things. Those are all opportunities for organisations in the future. We have to get those things right and understand the kind of new shape of families and society.
I think that, again, it kind of comes around to an education piece as well, because I think navigating all of that stuff's really, really hard. I'm the kind of if all else fails and somebody's having some type of in their family, or one of my friends or whatever, that they've got some type of care need, I'm of course the person that now gets the phone call. And
it's still a nightmare to get around the system.
The immediate response is it's a nightmare, because it is largely. I don't think. I can't think of a region where you could kind of point to and say, actually, you know what, in that particular area, it's really, really easy over there. You just go and speak to this person, and they send you guide through the process. There are obviously people who are trying to help care seekers to be able to navigate the system, but it's still really confusing. And there's so many different dynamics to it and things like that. So.
Well, we're still working really with a system that was put in place just after the Second World War, and it's just had various little changes made to it along the way. And I think the challenge for any kind of government or anybody trying to sit in the middle and sort all of this out is you can come up with a new system, but the transition from here to there is always going to be a challenge. And whether that's funding a different way of working, or providing services, or just helping people navigate, because we've got hundreds of thousands of people in a system at the moment, and you can't just kind of flick a switch and say, we're going to do it differently.
Couldn't agree more. Another slight change of gear. I'm going to ask some things that I think people will be very interested in, kind of your perspective and your kind of experiences on some things. So you are a human, so by virtue of that fact, that means that at some point or another you will have made mistakes, as we all do. How do you deal with failure and making mistakes, and how do you kind of address that, if you like?
Yes. I think you make mistakes all the time, because if you avoid making mistakes, you just never do anything. So you sort of have to make mistakes. And I think over many years of making mistakes, what I've learned is to not beat yourself up too much, to quickly move on from the pain of making the mistake to the what can I learn from that, and to be, to apologise to the people that have got caught up in your mistake, really. So I think it is part of learning, is making mistakes. Somebody once said to me, when you watch toddlers toddling around, if every time you fell over you didn't stand up again, none of us would ever walk. We'd all be on wheels, because that's a mistake when you fall over, but you stand up again, and actually your whole life is just a series of learning and standing up again. So I don't go rushing into mistakes if I can help it, and failing, but I do think it's it is important. And I guess there's different scales. So I suppose one of the things that in a job like mine you do a lot of really is risk assessment. As an organisation, we spend a lot of time thinking about risk and opportunity. So we have different levels of appetite for different types of risk. So we won't take risks operationally that impact on the lives of our residents. But we will take risks as an organisation. We'll spend money on stuff to have a go at things. So we'll take a bit of financial risk, and we'll try new things. But we do it in such a way that it's contained. And I think the other thing is, if something goes wrong, personally or in a sort of business context, to acknowledge that as quickly as possible, and not just keep going, because surely it'll come good in the end. Sometimes you do have to be tenacious about things, but if something's not working, then stop doing it.
Yeah, I think people get over-invested in ideas and become kind of emotionally connected to things, and they end up repeating mistakes. And I guess that's the worst thing, isn't it? Like it's all very well making a mistake, because we're human. That's just part of the course as such. But it's knowing that you've made the mistake, being able to reflect upon it, and again, kind of learning learning from that and using that to best effect in the future. So.
Yeah, and I think it's important to work with people who are honest. So I really value the fact I've got a team who regularly tell me when I'm wrong, which is really useful, because there's a real danger that you get in a job with a fancy down job title like mine and you think you're invincible. Absolutely not, you know. So I think it is really important in an organisation, particularly perhaps a big organisation, but in any organisation, that you listen when people say, I'm not sure about that, or, you know. So I value the fact I've got lots of colleagues who will come and shut the door, hopefully, and say, that's really not working, is it?
Constructive criticism, we all need it, don't we? Otherwise, I mean, you're sitting in an echo chamber, really, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's all, you can... Everyone wants, you've got to back your own horse on some level, but you've also got to know kind of when you've
I think that's why it's important. I think to do my job properly, I have to be out and about in the organisation a lot, and that's true of all of my senior team. And that's one of the reasons we don't have many offices, you know, because actually I think if you have, you know, if you sit in an office behind a desk, that's not what this organisation's about. So fundamentally, this organisation is about the, you know, 1,700 housing services and the 120 care homes, and being out and about and seeing what's happening and hearing what's happening means that your decision making should be better informed. So you should be less likely to make decisions that don't work.
That comes back to your earlier point about listening, of course, because if you're out there and you are listening and you're taking on board all of that useful insight and all those contextual points that we talked about earlier, those are going to be the things that are going to help you make good decisions, to help you steer the direction of the organisation. So you've obviously held a leadership role for quite a long time now. What would you say your biggest leadership lessons have been, or greatest leadership lessons, I should say?
Oh, loads all the time, really. I think one of the important things is understanding when people need clarity and understanding when it's okay to be working things through and not be... So there are times when it is just necessary to say, this is what we're doing and we're doing it this way. And it's not very often, but sometimes you just have to, you know, say, no, that's what we're going to do. So knowing when to do that is kind of a skill that you learn over time, I think. I think a really important thing is knowing people, the people you directly manage, knowing them as individuals. So I think I probably started off when I was managing people and moving into leadership roles with the thing about treating people equally. And I've learnt that equally doesn't mean the same. So different people are motivated in different ways, different things matter to people. And I draw on one of my leadership icons, who is Jurgen Klopp. So as somebody from Liverpool who's quite into football, one of the reasons that I think Jurgen Klopp is a really good football manager, let's hope he wins the big one this season, but if you watch him at the end of a football match, the way that he engages with each of his team members is quite different. And that to me suggests that he knows the ones that need the formal handshake and the well done, and the ones that like a really big hug, and the ones that, you know, no matter how well they've played, you don't overdo it, because that's not how it works. And the other, and I think that's part of leadership. The other thing I think is that people are watching all the time. It's the nature of the job. And so if your words and your actions don't match, then that's really disastrous. So, you know, you mustn't get yourself in a position where you're saying something that you don't believe, because people very quickly see through that. Sure. And I read a book or an article years ago about kind of the shadow you cast as a leader, and you always cast some kind of a shadow. So it might be, you might leave a sunny trail or you might leave a dark shadow, but at the end of the day, the job title, you know, you do leave a mark on people, and therefore it's important too. So although I'm not much of an actress, so you don't get Jane the chief exec on tour, but I would always seek not to have temper tantrums out and about. I don't do temper tantrums because my family tell me I'm just funny if I lose my temper, so that wouldn't work really. But you know, recognising that there is a responsibility that people will look to senior people in an organisation and take a lead from how you behave. So, you know, the culture of the organisation, if you know, we're very clear what our values are. If any of us don't live by those values, then, you know, that's it. They're gone, aren't they? So you're allowed to be a human being, and I always, you know, I think it's good to be seen as human beings, but there has to be that alignment between what we say and how we behave. Otherwise, you're on really shaky foundations.
We in our kind of coaching consulting world, we have a model which, if you imagine a page of A4 paper, on the left-hand side you've got your internal perception, and on the right-hand side you've got your external perception. So your internal perception is your values, your brand DNA, the behaviours of the teams, all of that type of stuff, how people are showing up. And then on the external side of things, you've got your marketing, your position, your your brand and your reputation, and the intersection between those two things is your brand promise. And if and that can be an employee brand, and that can be a kind of a consumer brand and things as well. If you get that wrong, if there's an imbalance there, people can smell it a mile.
Oh yeah,
it's just one of those things that you can see straight through it. I think one of the examples that I always use is BA. BA is one of those organisations that they kind of cast themselves as this luxury brand that are fantastic, and it's going to be all kind of plain sailing or flying, rather, I should say. But I had a friend recently who booked a stag do for a group of friends. They emailed him, I think, a week before they were all meant to be going away, to say, oh, sorry, your flight's cancelled, and then rang them up the next day once he'd rebooked the flights with somebody else to say, oh no, sorry, we made a mistake. Ooh, and you just think, they're flying with BA, they're paying a lot of money to be on that particular flight. You can't,
big whoops.
You can't tell your audience, if you like, or your customer base, that you're this special luxury organisation, and let people down on that kind of a level. And to your point, people just see through it. And
and I think for us, what's really interesting is that the Anchor Hanover brand has to work across a very wide range of price points. So we have everything in our organisation from our traditional rented retirement housing, which is it's social housing, so the price isn't set by us, it's set by the government. It's a sub-market rent, a really important service, and many of the people living in those services are funded to some extent by housing benefit. And we work all the way through to services where we're selling apartments, large apartments in a new retirement village at a local market rate in a high value area, so we'll be selling something for £750,000 or above. And that's the kind of housing offer. And then equally within care homes, as we know, we've got this mixed economy of people who are funded by the local authority, people who are paying for their own care, and finding a way that your brand has integrity and value, and is providing good value for money at all of those price points is one of the things that I've really enjoyed about as we've expanded the kind of Anchor Hanover offer, how we make sure that we have, as I say, that value for money across that range of services. So we're not, to put it crudely, we're not ripping off the people who are paying the most in highest weekly fees in some of our care homes, and we're not underplaying and reducing the quality of what we do in services which are funded in a different way. And getting that balance right is something that I think is really quite challenging but really important. And the care sector really benefits from the range of different types of organisations and price points and options. That's what choice is all about.
Sure.
But you can't feel as though there's a difference in the sort of quality of care. So there's something about getting the quality of care consistent, and then making sure that the other things that are offered as part of the higher price point different offer feel appropriate. So
you say that's a balance thing, isn't it? Ultimately, Anchor Hanover has a fantastic range, therefore it provides choice, which is a great thing. But then there would be an incongruence if that balance was not met well. But I mean, Anchor Hanover, it's one of those organisations that, from an outside perspective, it seems to have a great brand. People talk very positively about it. So certainly from my perspective, you certainly seem to be doing a good job from
we
what I hear, at least.
We are definitely not
anyway,
perfect, and I think hopefully we're pretty realistic about we get stuff wrong, we learn lessons from when we get stuff wrong, and I hope that we have a humility about listening to feedback and acknowledging when we get stuff wrong. But I mean, pleasingly for me, our colleague engagement survey, most of the people who work in the organisation are proud of what we do, and I think that's a real measure. If you're proud of what we do, and you think actually if somebody that I care about was looking for a service, I would recommend our services to them. That's a really kind of important measure for me.
It is really, really important, and I don't want to detract from the fact that it is super important anyway, but if you look at so from your CQC regulated in the care of homes and the dom care side of things as well, W2, I think the question something along the lines of basically the key line inquiry basically talks about, are the team proud to work within the organisation. There's a reason why the CQC asked that question, because if they're not proud, they're not going to be engaged, they're not going to be showing up to work in a way where it's really, really important for them to go and do a really, really good job and provide a meaningful experience for whoever it is they're looking after. So it's important from an organisational perspective, but it's also important from the perspective of making sure that the regulators are, of course, happy. They're asking those questions for
which is good, because it's nice when those things are aligned. The other thing I put a lot of store by is your care rating, which is, so, again, declaring interest. We were involved at the very beginning when a little group of us got together to talk about, so what could we do to drive improvement in the sector, to raise the profile of the sector, for people to see that there's good stuff in the social care sector. It's quite a long time ago now. And out of those early musings came what is now completely independent, your care rating, Ipsos Mori methodology, independent board running it. But to me, that model that says, so Ipsos did all that work to find out what really matters to people using services, because some of the stuff that the regulator looks at matters to residents, some of it less so. Some of it matters to me from a business KPIs perspective, some of it less so. But your care rating is all about, so what are the things that matter to residents? And how is this service doing against those issues? So that, I always say to people, if there's 3 bits of information in the year that matter most to me, it's the your care rating feedback, the colleague survey feedback, and our customer satisfaction survey from our housing customers. If you put those together with a dash of CQC ratings and my KPI dashboard, then I should be able to see, where we're doing well and where the areas for improvement are as well.
Again, it comes back to humility then, and saying, okay, so here's the feedback, now we know what we need to be able to go and do to keep driving improvements and things. So.
And needs change, customers, I can certainly see in the time I've been in Anchor, the priorities have changed in terms of the people who use our services. The people access our services at different stages. So stays in care homes are shorter than they used to be. There's more variety of services available for people with things like extra care and independent living, which is great. Activity used to be a bit of a sideline. We were one of the first organisations, I think, to have activity coordinators in all of our services. We've moved on from that, so now activity is a mainstream activity for everybody, a responsibility of everybody in a care home. And we've moved from just the structured activities, which have a value, through to just a proper understanding of a meaningful, purposeful day for everybody using our services. That's been really quite a change.
No, I bet. Earlier on, you talked about values. I think you touched upon behaviours as well. I'd kind of put that in the category of culture. How important is culture for you personally and for Anchor Hanover?
Yeah, I think it's really, it's kind of, when we talk about, we use businessy words like brand and proposition and important stuff like that. It's part of that. It's the how of those things. So some of those things are what. So if I'm using your services, what's the deal? What do I get? The how it's delivered tends to be really through the behaviours and the values and the culture of the organisation. So I think one of the consequences of scale is, I remember, I hadn't been in this job for very long, and one of my board members said, what's the culture like? And I said, well, there's several thousand sites out there going on. Every site will have its own culture to some extent, but there's something about, there should be cross-cutting. There's a general feeling of the way we do things around here, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And at the end of the day, when somebody's faced with a split-second decision, the culture is really critical. So, you're a team leader working on a night shift, or you're an estate manager working in a housing service. At the point that you have to make a speedy decision, then hopefully we've trained people, we've given them the tools to do the job, they know the processes and the procedures, but then culture is the thing that sits underneath that. At the point where they say, and this is what I should do in this situation then.
Sure. I really like the fact that you've said that it's the key, it's a decision-making tool, because I think that's ultimately what it is. It's being when people are presented with sets of circumstances, whether that be you as the CEO or whether that be one of the frontline team members, being able to know that, because that's not in an autocratic way, but because this is the standard that we uphold, that this is the way that we do things around here, that people will have kind of their expectations managed around what that standard ultimately is. And it becomes self-managing to a certain extent once everyone's holding themselves. But once once it's clearly defined, then people can work better together to be able to support each other, to hold
to call each other out
standard.
and say, so our values are about being accountable, respectful, courageous and honest. And we have a bit of a description of what that means in relation to Anchor Hanover, but we use those as part of assessing feedback from people. So are we living up to those values? I always talk about how it's important you have to fulfil all of them. You can't pick and choose. So you can't say, I'm going to be honest now, so I'm going to tell you all the things that I think are terrible about you, without also recognising that one of our values is about being respectful.
Sure. So
a lot of it is about using all four of the values together, but having that culture that says if somebody behaves in a way that you think isn't in line with values, then it's honest to say, I don't think that's quite the expectation. And we had some events over the course of the last year post-merger, getting colleagues together to talk about the new organisation and our business plan, what our priorities were, all of those kind of things. And we talked a lot about the values and people giving examples of where they think the values are well lived, what it looks like, and what it looks like when it's not working. So we do talk about that kind of thing a lot.
It sounds like there's a lot of touch points for where the values are used as that decision-making tool, and to be able to try and help derive the right type of outcomes, whatever that might be, and that it's done in a really, really positive way as well, which I think is
that's certainly the intent, and it's the basis for the hard stuff, like the policies and the procedures and the processes as well. They have to, they have to stand being tested against our values.
I think we're very well aligned from that perspective. We spend lots of time talking to people about helping them to design a culture, because I think there's this is one thing that I find really, really fascinating, and it's something that people I think recognise, but they maybe don't think about it in this level of kind of definition, if you like. But you can have a culture by design, or you can have a culture by default.
Yeah, you always have a culture.
You always have a culture, yeah, exactly. Now, you can still have a strong culture by default because you've managed to pull the right team of people together who, on some level, are well aligned. But if you haven't mapped that out and you haven't been specific around what the values are and what does that mean, what are kind of the behaviours and things that are attached to those particular those values, and then how do they manifest within the team, and how they're used as a decision-making tool and ultimately embedded into the behaviours of the team, then again you're still acting by default. And ultimately, if you're acting by default, then in some level you're exposed, and obviously in whether it be care or support or housing, if people are exposed or the organisation is exposed, that's when, from a risk perspective, that's when you're leaving yourself open to things going wrong. It's not to say that it always goes right, because but because we're all human. Again, we're talking about people here, but.
I think you also have to be careful that you don't give the impression that everybody has to be the same. So a big theme in our business plan is about diversity and inclusivity, and wanting colleagues and residents to be themselves and to attract as wide a variety of people and experiences and backgrounds to the organisation as we can. And I think sometimes it's important not to describe the values and the culture as a sort of groupthink. You have to complete people. Diversity and inclusivity is one of the things that's really important about our organisation. It challenges our thinking if people have got different experiences. And also, from a really practical point of view, thinking about workforce, the broader we can draw our search for new colleagues to join the organisation, the better. And the better that will be for our residents, because they will have a wider variety of people working with them, and sharing their experiences. So we've got a strong focus on diversity and inclusivity, which I think people are receiving well. So we've got networks within the organisation for colleagues from the BME community, for colleagues with disabilities, for colleagues from the LGBTQ community, just to try and make sure everybody feels welcome. And we just have that concept of everyone is welcome in the organisation, which I think is also an important issue for employers going forwards, is not looking as though we're an organisation that has big boundaries and only you have to fit a certain mould. So my experience is very much that you can have shared values in a very diverse and inclusive environment.
It's the wonderful thing about humans. We are all different. We've all got something different to contribute. So it's having all those different kind of the wonderful different types of humans to contribute to a kind of a collective cause.
Well, it makes us much richer if we have a wider variety of contributions.
Absolutely, absolutely. question for you. So, if you had one piece of advice for somebody looking to make a positive impact on the health and social care kind of world, if you like, or housing included in that as well,
Yeah.
what would you say? What
gosh.
would you say that is?
One piece of advice. I think actually it's probably don't assume. So, you know, a couple of times I've talked about listening. It is, don't come into, if you want to do something great in this sector, don't assume that you know what older people want. Don't assume that, you know, what happens at the moment is all perfect and you should replicate that. But be open-minded and just think differently about what's needed, because I think the world is changing quite quickly, and it's quite a good time to be trying different things. So certainly, if there was one, you know, a couple of pieces of advice, but one would be about being open-minded and not making assumptions.
That's something that's been quite consistent with some of my guests recently. So I had Caroline Baker on recently, the director of dementia for Barchester, and one of the learnings that I got from her was that we should spend her kind of area of expertise, if you like, is in the kind of the dementia realm. She said what we need to do is spend as much time as possible learning from dementia care experts, and that's not the people with the PhDs, that's not even people like me with all the operational experience, it's people living with dementia themselves, so we can go and focus on exactly what they need, want, desire, whatever that might be, and to be able to build our services around that. So I think that's very, very, very wise advice, so thank you very much.
Good day.
And what would you say, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given personally?
I've been lucky. I've worked with lots of people who I've learnt from. So I watch people, I think, and learn and look and think, oh yes, how would so-and-so do that, or those kind of things. So somebody said to me quite early in my career, if you're good enough, you're old enough.
Okay. So
I was doing it, I don't think I'm ready for that job. And somebody I worked with then said, if you're good enough, you're old enough, which I think translates as, you know, don't feel bound by age or other things, you know, have a go, I suppose, which is a bit like when we were talking about, you know, my career, actually be open to opportunities and have a go at things. I think there is also something about breadth. So I think it's also good advice to not be too narrow in your focus. So it's important if you work in a sector to know lots of stuff about that sector. But I think people learn a lot from very different environments. So you know, try different things. I think I always love it when you get talking to a group of colleagues and you find out the things that people do outside work, and they have this fabulous rich experience of doing other stuff, and if they bring that learning into work, then you know that enhances how they do their job as well. So there's definitely, I can't sum it up in a pithy little phrase, but you know, broaden your horizons, you know, read widely, think widely, and the other thing actually is just enjoy it. I mean, this job is a real sort of privilege, and I do regularly sit on the train going home, and it's quite late and I'm quite tired, and then I just have to sort of pinch myself and think, you know, just think, you know, count your blessings really. You know, I just meet amazing people all the time, out and about in our organisation. You bump into a resident, and the next thing you know, you're having this amazing conversation about what happened in their life or people they know, and the same with colleagues. So there's definitely something about, you know, count your blessings and focus on the positive.
Well, those are some fantastic pearls of wisdom. So, Jane, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been fun. Thank you.
Excellent.